Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Karen Bilsland, lecturer in business management at the University of Aberdeen Business School. Today, I'm delighted to welcome so many of you to our In Conversation With event. So on the first Wednesday of every month, the Business School will host conversations with business leaders on topics including sustainability, entrepreneurship, and energy transition. So we're very excited to be virtually joined by so many alumni, students, business leaders and colleagues for these events. And can I just remind you that this event this morning is being recorded. And we would encourage you to join our conversation, so please feel free to ask questions using the question and answer box. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Emeka Emembolu to discuss the topic for today, focusing on the question, what next for the North Sea? Emeka, a very warm welcome. Thank you for finding the time to join us. Let me start by asking you to introduce yourself, and if you could please tell us a little about you and your role.
Thanks very much, Karen. Thanks for having me on the call today, and yeah, thanks everybody who's joined the call. My name is Emeka Emembolu. I'm Senior Vice President for the North Sea at BP. I've been with BP for 23 years. So I joined BP here in Aberdeen in the North Sea with a degree in biochemical engineering from the University of Sheffield. Worked in a variety of places around the world. So Aberdeen, Angola, Egypt, Alaska, the Gulf of Mexico, so a number of different roles, and back in the North Sea, based here in Aberdeen. So, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Emeka. It's fantastic to hear that you've been with BP since graduating. What inspired you to get into the industry, and also what are the big changes that you've seen over the years?
A good question, Karen. So I joined BP back in 1998. To be honest, I didn't know what I was getting into. When I was looking at different roles, so studied a degree in biochemical engineering. So I knew I wanted to join a big engineering company. I interviewed with a few, and when I decided to join BP, I'd say two big things actually, and this may be simple things. One was the people I met at the interview were people who I really knew I wanted to work with. They were, so actually I felt like I got on well with the people I met, and I felt like I could work well in that company. And what BP offered at the time was an opportunity to travel, to see the world, and to get involved in a really exciting industry. So yeah, those were the things that really, at the beginning, really attracted me to BP. In terms of changes I've seen over the years, things have changed massively over the years, both for BP, for the North Sea, for industry. I would say one of the biggest changes, obviously, that has happened, and we all talk about it, is around the energy transition. So the current dialogue that's going on in society around diversifying from fossil fuels, from hydrocarbons to lower carbon forms of energy is probably the biggest thing I would say that's happened in industry today.
Excellent, thank you. That's really insightful. So net zero and the energy transition are phrases that we hear quite a lot these days, as you mentioned, especially as Scotland prepares to host COP26 in Glasgow. Can you explain exactly what this means and what impact it will have on places and cities like Aberdeen?
Yeah, so what it's simplest terms I can say, what net zero means is net zero is an estimation of the balance of hydrocarbons that come into the atmosphere. And in a net zero, for a net zero system, what you're trying to do is actually not have additional hydrocarbons go into the environment. So that's what the net zero, that's what it means. So basically, what it drives you towards in order to achieve that net zero balance is somehow to offset or capture the carbon that could be produced either from production operations or consumption of hydrocarbons, or it also drives you towards generating energy from things which do not involve hydrocarbons at all. So the energy transition is the pathway, is the glide way towards net zero. In terms of what this means for places like Aberdeen, so Aberdeen has been built historically a lot on the hydrocarbon industry. And what this means, what the energy transition means, is we have to change. So it means we have to think about how so the UK and the world will continue to need oil and gas for a long while to come. It's not as easy as kind of switching off a light to move from fossil fuel based energy to lower carbon forms of energy, as those will take time to build. It'll take time to build that infrastructure out. But what it means for Aberdeen is Aberdeen has to figure out, both as a city, how they move towards that net zero form of energy management, but also how we take the skills and actually how Aberdeen reinvents itself for that future. And Aberdeen is a city that has reinvented itself multiple times over actually going back decades. So this is going to be the next big reinvention for Aberdeen.
Excellent. Thank you very much for explaining all of that. That was a brilliant summary. I'll touch upon skills later that are required in the North Sea, but BP is clearly committed to the energy transition and to pivoting from an international oil company to an integrated energy company. So what part can the North Sea play in this? That would be my question.
Thanks for that. So the question you asked, Karen, is one that a lot of people in the North Sea and the BP North Sea team ask quite regularly. So, as I mentioned about the energy transition, the UK and the world will need oil and gas for a while to come. What BP is going to do in the North Sea, and what the role of the North Sea, one of the big first roles the North Sea is going to need to play is going to be how we reduce the emissions from the production of oil and gas to the absolute minimum that we can. That we describe that as decarbonizing the energy supply, offshore energy supply. Recently, with the government and with the Oil and Gas Authority, we had agreed to something called the North Sea Transition Deal, which sets limits on the amount of hydrocarbons or the amount of emissions that can come out of our facilities over time. And so it kind of signs us basically up to a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030, and then continue to move towards net zero by 2045, 2050. What that will mean is we'll need to do things like, if anyone has been to the North Sea or seen the North Sea, you'll see that there is as part of operational activity, there's flaring that happens in the North Sea. We need to eliminate routine flaring. That's going to be one of the early steps we're going to have to take. Across all of the companies, we're going to have to think about how we reduce any emissions to sea as well that might occur during routine operations. So really, we're going to have to clean up all of our operations that we have offshore. And then another big source of emissions is power generation offshore. So a lot of the offshore platforms have their own independent power generators that use hydrocarbons to generate power to manage the operations. A big focus for us is going to be how we electrify those operations and potentially get that power from lower carbon sources in order to generate the oil and gas that's needed. So, a lot of focus on what we do to decarbonize our operations. But I will also say on the other side, there's a big focus on building up, doing other things like CCUS, which will directly take carbon from heavy industry and other sources and re-inject back into, so basically harvesting carbon from industry or even from the atmosphere and re-injecting that into stores in the North Sea, and then converting to other forms of energy like hydrogen and solar. And we'll probably talk about those later as well.
Brilliant. Got a lot to do then. Yeah. BP also recently announced an ambitious bid in the Scotland offshore wind leasing round, and if successful, this would see a £10 billion investment in Scotland. Are you able to share a bit more information about this?
Yeah, we're very excited about this. So we see this as almost the first part of a plan we have to electrify Scotland. Would be the way I would describe it. So we've bid for a lease in the North Sea. Our intention would be to build offshore wind platforms on that lease. Actually, build a significant number of offshore wind facilities on that lease, which should generate close to 2 gigawatts of energy. In that successful full bid, the other parts that we've put in, we've included are a bid to build a significant number of electric charging points in Scotland. We'll actually be having our global center of expertise for wind based in Aberdeen. So again, I think of this as a big bet on Scotland. We're planning to build offshore wind systems all over the world, but we think Aberdeen is a great place to start because of the skills that exist in Aberdeen and the opportunities that exist in Aberdeen to work with other companies, other parts of the supply chain, and with the Scottish government. So we think that's this would be a good place to start. And we're also going to commit to improving some ports here in Scotland as well. So we're looking to upgrade 2 ports, which we think will be needed to service offshore wind, and we're looking at construction of fully electric vessels for offshore wind system installation. So it's a pretty ambitious, I would say, broad-ranging set of activities that we're looking to do in the North Sea as part of this bid.
Yeah, it's very ambitious, but that's fantastic. So that kind of leads nicely on to my next question, coming back to the sorts of skills that will be required in the North Sea today. What sort of skills do you think are required in the North Sea today, and how do you see this maybe changing as the energy transition gathers pace?
So skills that are required in the North Sea today, just a huge range of skills. So today we have engineering, we have engineers, we have offshore operators, we have technicians, we have environmental scientists, we have lawyers, we have people who work on communications. We have geoscientists. Just a huge range of different skills exist in the North Sea today. Project managers, drilling engineers, construction, you name it. It takes a lot to build an offshore and to operate an offshore facility as safely as we always try to do. As the transition occurs, in terms of the skills that would transfer across, it's probably worth just a quick point on, actually, we're going to go from oil and gas production to, I'd say the big new forms of energy will be solar, wind, hydrogen, and hydroelectric. Hydroelectric probably won't play as much of a part in the North Sea, but it will in other places. Solar, you might say, is one of the hardest ones to see a direct transfer between oil and gas and solar. But solar actually does still require construction at large scale, requires project management, requires commercial activity, requires electrical engineering, requires maintenance and support. Those are all skills which we can transfer from oil and gas along to solar. And in fact, BP, well, a couple of interesting things. Our logo, as you probably may, for anybody who's familiar with the BP logo, is a big sun. And this is something we got into 20 years ago when we actually started envisioning an eventual transition towards solar energy. The other thing I would actually, I think is worth highlighting is BP bought a company called Lightsource BP a few years ago, and the CEO of Lightsource BP has remarked on how much synergy he has found between what we had done traditionally in BP and what Lightsource BP does. And the current chief operating officer of Lightsource BP, a lady called Ann Davis, used to be a completions engineer in the North Sea. So again, we're already starting into that transition. But as I said, solar is the hardest, but it is happening. Wind, I just talked about the big wind bid, and that's going to need electrical engineers. It's going to need rotating equipment engineers. It's going to need commercial analysts. It's going to need negotiators to help us actually make the deals that would set this up. It's going to need a lot of the same skills. And when we get to the operational stage, we will need technicians and operators who know how to manage rotating equipment, and a lot of the kind of systems that we have traditionally in oil and gas will go along. The last one I'll say is CCUS and hydrogen. Those two things are very, very close to hydrocarbons. So the match or the map is almost direct between existing skills and what's needed in the future. There are differences. Hydrogen is a very different gas to methane in terms of how you manage it. But again, we know how to handle difficult gases. So that's a skill that we will bring. And CCUS is basically oil and gas production in reverse. So again, very much the same thing. So I would say as a company, and actually as an industry and broader, even with the Scottish government, one of the important things we're committed to as part of the energy transition is something we call a just transition, to make sure that the skills and the communities who are currently impacted or beneficiaries of the existing oil and gas industry don't get left behind as part of this transition. So that's something that we're actively working on, and we think is actually going to be very possible. And at the end of the day, we actually think will generate a lot more jobs than exist today because of the scale of construction that's going to happen to support it.
That's great, thank you. There's plenty of opportunities then. I don't think people realise what's involved really unless you're working in the industry and what really goes on behind the scenes and how it all comes together with everyone working together to make all of this a reality. That's great, excellent. My next question is, how is BP embracing innovation in the sector? And you've touched on that in your responses to other questions here, but how would you describe that, how BP is embracing innovation in the sector?
Yeah, I think for any business to be successful, I think you have to innovate or you have to consider you might be getting out of business. So, you know, we really take that on. Maybe to give you some specific examples. So on the technological side, we're using drones. So we're working with some companies to employ drones to go offshore and monitor and test for emissions. In one of our facilities in the Gulf of Mexico, we're using Boston Dynamics robots as effectively sniffer dogs to go around the facilities and inspect. We have crawlers in some of our facilities that we use for pipeline inspection and painting. So we're embracing a lot of robotics technologies to take the place of some of the high hazard things we might need to do, what we might need to do offshore. And it helps us do a lot of these things even more regularity than we previously could. We're looking at autonomous remote operating vehicles, so ROVs, that we can do pipeline surveys with. And in fact, most recently, we in the last month, we did one of the first ROV inspections where the ROV was piloted from shore. So there was nothing offshore, it was completely kind of long distance piloted underwater at our Clare field. So technology is a huge part of what we do. The other in an area of innovation, I would say, is around partnerships. So working with different companies, BP, Shell, Harbour Energy, and Total are currently working together to look at electrification of assets in the central North Sea. And that's going to include us partnering with the OGA, with BEIS, with the Energy Department, with the Scottish and the English and the UK governments. So we need to, but what we are aware of is no single one of these companies will be able to electrify the assets in the North Sea that need to be done at scale. So we need to look at innovative ways of partnering across companies that may not always have the same aligned view, but we do have the same end goal of wanting to electrify all of these facilities. So that's another form of innovation, I would say. And maybe a third, I would say, is around commercial innovation. So, you know, we got into a partnership with Aberdeen City to look at how we decarbonize Aberdeen. And I think increasingly one of the things BP and a number of other companies will be doing is looking at how you collaborate with cities are big urban sources of carbon emissions. There are a lot of cars. The cities have done things like create non-driving pedestrianized zones in order to reduce emissions, but all of the buildings in these cities still require energy. We need to think differently about how we help cities grow, but in a way that's compatible with a net zero agenda for the world. So I'd say, yeah, technological partnership and kind of commercial innovation are things which we're getting into, and we have to do more and more of as time goes by.
Yeah, that's all really interesting and insightful. Thank you. I think we'll move over to the chat box. It's great to see so many questions coming in, so thanks everyone. So many questions being asked here, and I'm conscious of time as well. I know we have some students joining us virtually today, so really based on any sort of advice that you would give, Emeka, to anyone looking to pursue a career in the sector. So we'll take the first question from Cyril Bruce Kathleen. Hi Emeka, 2 questions from me. How have you strategically grown from entry level to VP level? And what advice would you give to be the winning recipe for me and anyone who aspires to reach such level? So what advice would you give to anyone looking to pursue a career in the energy sector?
Okay, so I'll give some advice on getting into a career. In terms of the winning recipe, I'm sure there are many, so I couldn't profess to giving them one single winning recipe, but I can share what I think worked for me. So how have I strategically grown? Maybe I'll actually say, this is kind of what advice would I give to people coming in? I would say, basically jump in, go for it, apply to roles in companies. And like I said at the beginning, I chose BP. I chose to work at BP because I really actually like the people and I like the culture of the company. And I would say, so try and find somewhere to work you will enjoy and you feel like you will get on. That if you're doing what you enjoy, it's going to be easy. So that would be one. Second, I would say I found that it has paid to stay curious and try and understand how things work and listen and learn as I've gone through my career. And that's something which I would just always encourage people to do. To learn more, to listen, to try to understand how things work, and try to think about how you can then make them better. That would be another bit of advice. And the third is, well, this might go without saying, but it does take hard work, and I think you have to work hard. Would be, and by working hard, I don't mean working 16-hour days, but just when you're working in a team with people who are depending on you, you have to do the things that they're depending on you to do. So those would be my kind of bits of advice. In terms of, the winning recipe, I feel like if you do those things, you're going to put yourself in a good chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's some really great advice and our students will appreciate that. So thank you. Let's see, so let's move on to one from Paul Pinkerton at Coase Energy. Apologies if I pronounced that wrong. Paul's posted a really good question here. First of all, thank you to BP Intended Investment in OSW in and around Aberdeen. In terms of jobs for 1 GW of OSW, is it safe to say that the peak construction will last a maximum of 2 years and require approximately 800 people, 50% of which will be with OEMs and therefore not within Aberdeen, while the OEM of OSW only require approximately 50 people, mostly technicians across the lifetime of the OSW lifetime. So quite a long question there. How would you respond to that one from Paul?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for the question. I don't have a full answer to your question. I think the numbers are higher than you think, and I don't. For the one gigawatt of offshore wind, this is a starting point. So we actually plan to build a significant. So this is the first foray, I would say for BP at least, that we're getting into on offshore wind. Your number of 800 people being required could be right. I couldn't say that for sure. But what we are doing, what BP is doing, is we are committing to producing with our partners EnBW to leveraging as much of the Scottish supply chain to do what we are going to be doing offshore as we can. So I don't, 50% of it being outside of Aberdeen, that may be right as well. But again, for the 50% that is in Aberdeen, we will be investing, for example, in the port of Aberdeen, to look at how we electrify that will benefit not just offshore wind, but will benefit any users of Aberdeen Harbour. So that's something which we would be looking to work with the port, and that will require, again, that will be in addition to the 800 people or whatever the number of people are who are directly working on offshore wind. In terms of the operation and maintenance of the offshore wind platforms requiring 50 people, I think that's on the low end as well of what, according to our estimates, given the scale of what our ambition in Scotland, I don't think it will require, we'll look to make it as efficient as we can. I expect it to be more than 50 people. But again, 50 people is the size of a small platform in the North Sea. So that in itself is not insubstantial. The other thing that we are going to be looking at is using so actually in the build-up to construction of offshore wind facilities, we've established a portal. So BP has established a portal we're encouraging local suppliers in the North Sea to work on or to contribute to, so we can attract a lot of local talent to participate in what we do offshore. So I don't know how right your numbers are, but I think they may be on the low end of what is going to happen.
Okay, that's great, thank you. One other question from Rodolfo Salinas. How much human resources demand do you forecast for the energy sector in Aberdeen comparing 2010 to 2030? Okay, I will use BP as a bit of an example, and we're working on our overall projections right now. Today in the North Sea, so directly, we have about 1,200 people working in the North Sea. About 700 of those are offshore. We are projecting, I would say, that in 2030, the number of people who work on and I'll just say our existing footprint plus what we're planning to build, we think could be roughly double what we have right now. So if you project that out to beyond BP into the rest of the supply chain, and also if you think about the amount of investment, so BP talked about $10 billion of investment. I anticipate other companies will be bringing in other billions of dollars of investment into new energies, plus what we're all investing and continuing to invest into oil and gas. I would say the number of people working in the energy sector, Rodolfo, to your question, will be at least comparable with what we have today, if not significantly more. For BP, we anticipate, with the global center of expertise we're building, with the offshore leases we're building, and with the operations we'll continue to manage, we're going to need more people by 2030 than what we have today. Yeah, great, thank you. Well, I think we've just got time for one more question before we round off for today. We'll go to another good one from Cyril Bruce. Kathleen, what are the current resistance you're facing in reaching net zero, and are there resistances to change?
I wouldn't say that there are resistances to change as such, because there is a huge focus from all parts of society, including push from the government. I'd say there is some fear about what the change means, because change is always different. And so there is fear of people losing their jobs or people having to do different jobs. And we need to help people through that. I think that's the most important thing. So I wouldn't necessarily call this resistance, but this change is going to require investment. And so we need to think about where the funds are going to come from. And that's something that all of us as an industry and society are going to have to work through. So I wouldn't describe it as resistance, just more, it's a difficult problem to figure out. So we all have to put a lot of effort into figuring it out.
Yeah, that's nicely put. maybe you could talk just a little bit briefly about your leadership style and maybe tie that into a final question being what you're most proud of that BP has achieved in the North Sea.
My leadership style, well, this is a good question for people I work with, but I would say I did try to get clear on the problems we're trying to solve and actually deal or approach dealing with those problems in a respectful but focused and direct way. So, you know, I'm sure other people might have different views, but that's what I think. In terms of what I'm most proud of that BP has achieved in the North Sea. So over 50 years ago, BP discovered the Forties field, and with the Forties field, we built out a huge amount of infrastructure to develop North Sea oil and gas. So at its peak, it was producing 1.1 million barrels of oil a day, and has provided opportunities for millions of people over the period. So it's been, you know, including the Grangemouth refinery, the 6 fields offshore that Apache now operate, just a huge bit of infrastructure. So very proud of that. And I'm hopeful that in 10 years' time, as we start building out this new energy infrastructure, again, that'll be something else that BP and actually our whole industry can look to with pride for what we've done for the energy transition.
Unfortunately, we're out of time and we need to bring this event to a close now. Thank you, Emeka. And for anyone that's taken time to ask a question, first of all, thank you. And second, if your question hasn't been answered by Emeka, if you have provided your name and with your question, then we'll contact you by email later. So a huge thank you to Emeka. Thank you for giving us an insight into your career, the energy transition and what this means for the city, for sharing your story and your thoughts and experiences with us today. Thank you very much. And also thank you to everyone who's joined us, our audience. Thank you for your engaging questions. And we hope to see you at the next event in our series, which will be In Conversation with Stuart Mackenzie, Head of Communications for Tennant Caledonian Breweries. And Stuart will discuss marketing in Scotland's oldest business on Wednesday, the 6th of October. So thank you all very much again for joining us and have a great day.